Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Omar Ashour. I have a confession. I am not Aisha al-Basri. As in the program, we had to change, so Aisha kindly swapped with me. And I'm very pleased to chair this session on Iran, Central Asia, and the South Caucasus, having three distinguished speakers, each of which will speak for about 15 minutes. And we are going to start with Dr. Banafsheh Keynoush, who is going to talk to us about the conflicts in Iran's north corridors. Dr. Keynoush is a scholar at the Middle East Institute, and she's a fellow at the Sectarian and the Desectarianism Project, and formerly a visiting scholar at Princeton University. She's the co-author of the States of the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Abrams Accords, and also the author of the World Powers and Iran. And she is also the editor of Iran Interregional Dynamics in the Near East, and has another book on, or a book-length report on revolutionary Iran's Africa policy. And she's going to talk to us on the conflicts in Iran's northern corridors. So without further ado, please.
Good morning. I want to thank the Arab Center and the Iranian Studies Unit and everyone. Good morning. I want to thank the Arab Center, the Iranian Studies Unit, and our chair and my co-panelists. It's a pleasure to be a part of this morning's session. As I have been listening throughout the last 2 days about the conversation we've had in this great gathering, it has occurred to me that my paper brings a shift in the perspectives of our conversation, in the sense that if we were to imagine the word geopolitics, I think that my paper would have geo with a non-capital G and politics with a capital P. So if you allow me, I would like to discuss with you how much politics, in fact, affects Iran's Look East policy. And I decided to take the case study of, yes, as you can see, Iran's conflicts around, along its northern corridors, mindful of the Ukrainian war, as well as the tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, although I was shown how to do this, please forgive me, I'm good. Yeah, I think I'm good. Yes, it's right here. Thank you so much. So, as we know, Iran, the interplay of the war in Ukraine, in Eurasia, and the Armenian and Azerbaijani conflict in the smaller sub-region of the South Caucasus, needless to say, profoundly affected Iran along its increasingly fragmented northern borders. And I will explain why these borders are increasingly fragmented in a moment. But essentially, these borders have been meant to connect Iran to the South Caucasus through Azerbaijan and Armenia, and through Georgia and Ukraine to Eastern Europe. So you can imagine how difficult it is for Iran to see tensions along its northern corridors. Iran has failed to pay attention, however, to the conflicts to its north sufficiently because it was very preoccupied with building a relationship with the West within the framework of the nuclear deal of 2015 and the post-nuclear deal era, after the deal itself actually broke down when the Trump administration withdrew the U.S. from that deal in 2018. And about that time, around the time that President Trump actually started threatening that he would pull from out of this deal in 2017, I would argue humbly that that is when Iran decided to advocate more openly for a stronger Look East policy, which would have involved better ties with its northern neighbors as well. Now, because of this failure to pay attention earlier to its northern neighbors, Iran's Look East policy, designed to advance security by balancing ties with both East and West, suffered a great deal. And this was despite the fact that it has historically enjoyed a symbiotic relationship with Armenia, an indispensable partnership with Russia, as we know, and economic and ideational links with Azerbaijan, needless to say, as well as a decent diplomatic relationship with Ukraine until very recently. Now, to avert risks, Iran basically advocated for non-alignment. Tehran's non-aligned policy projected impartiality, although with a mixed result, because of the fact that some of Iran's supposedly non-neutral policies were rather misleading, and they aimed to influence its northern neighbors. Nevertheless, Iran engaged in what I call meta-relational exchanges with its neighbors, based on rationally driven realpolitik calculations in a host of arenas like diplomacy, security. It also resorted to some ideological policies to kind of get events shaping a little bit to its favor. And I'll go into that a little later. Through this non-alignment, Iran did advocate for basically what I would say is, I did say that. So basically, it advocated for positive neutrality, which aimed to avoid direct involvement in the conflicts, but still gave Iran the right to engage somehow in these conflicts, to change the nature of those conflicts a little bit to its favor. And at the same time, it also sometimes remained passively neutral in that it counted on the fact that at some point, its northern neighbors, be it Russia or Ukraine or Armenia or Azerbaijan, would demonstrate conflict fatigue, and that would provide Iran with an opportunity to influence the tensions along its northern borders. But Iran nonetheless did show clear vulnerability as it tried to formulate a strong, proactive foreign policy because of the inherent tensions within these so-called non-aligned policy making strategies that it tried to develop. And this led to the systemic degradation of its ability to reshape the conflicts to the north. Now, to overcome some of this handicap, as I said, Iran not only developed its positive and neutral policies, but it also developed a series of diplomatic, security, and ideational and economic policies, which I'd like to kind of go a little bit further into some detail, mindful of the limited time that we have. When the diplomatic front, Iran fostered a conversation. It actually offered its mediation, especially after Russia was able, for example, to broker a deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 2020. And it did resort to a little bit of a carrot and stick policy with Azerbaijan because as neighbors, they want to live with each other, but Azerbaijan is becoming more and more assertive along Iran's northern borders. And for example, it's trying to create new strategic corridors of its own, such as the Zangezur corridor, which essentially will disconnect Iran geographically speaking, from its northern neighbors, especially Armenia, to a large extent. And if you look at the map, the border between Iran and Armenia is already not that extended. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict gave more territory to Azerbaijan. And now with Azerbaijan asserting its kind of say along these corridors, Iran could potentially lose access to vital economic lifelines. And I want to come back to this because Iran's potential starvation could be in the making. And if that were to happen, the only border that will remain for Iran to fully engage with more confidently with the world would be its borders with Iraq. Mindful of the tensions that Iran and the Taliban have, the tensions that Iran and the Gulf states will always somehow have, and predominant U.S. ability to basically involve itself in those parts, in the Gulf particularly. Now, meanwhile, sitting back in Tehran, Iran did realize that its border northern borders will remain in a state of perpetual conflict, and this demanded some cross-engagement with multiple actors. So along these cross-engagement lines, Iran did take a number of initiatives, like kind of warning against Azerbaijan's desire to join NATO or Ukrainian desire to join NATO, but at the same time exercising non-alignment. It also adhered to UN resolutions, for example, that did say that Armenia had occupied Azerbaijani land and that therefore those lands had to be returned. Iran also took a number of other initiatives that opened new consulates in Armenia as Azerbaijan's relationships particularly expanded with countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel. And it also offered a proportional response if Ukraine downgraded its ties with Iran. And many of you know that in this process that we are speaking, Ukraine continues to downgrade its ties with Iran. Now, fast forward, Iran did face a number of diplomatic challenges. I did speak about a number of them, but geostrategically, one of the major challenges was the United States, in the sense that the United States tried to stir Armenia away from Iran. And it also tried, to an extent, to stir Armenia away from an emerging Russian-Iranian-Armenian axis of cooperation, mindful especially of Iran's historic links with Armenia and close relations with Armenia. Now, basically, in Yerevan, in Kiev, in all the capitals in the north, Iran also had to be mindful of predominant Russian interests in the region. Therefore, Iran's policy formulation was very piecemeal in this region, because it always constantly had to think first about what the Russians might do. Now, I'm sorry, it's very hard for me to work with both a PowerPoint and my notes. Iran also resorted to some security calculations along the north. It developed some defensive posturing. It led a couple of military drills, basically to signal to Azerbaijan its sensitivity about its borders. It stressed the need for the inviolability of its borders. It was also very mindful that because Iran has both an Azerbaijani and Armenian minority population, that it had to engage in internal balancing to help, create less tensions internally inside Iran about the conflicts to its north. However, Azerbaijan continued to stress the border takeovers through the Zangezur corridor and et cetera. Some of the cases I did mention, I can talk about them a little later. And so Iran essentially failed to do very much on the security front when it came to its northern corridors. On the economic front, it had ambitions to use its south-north corridors to connect the north to the south, to also connect Central Asia and the Caucasus through Iran to Syria, Iran to the Mediterranean. Very ambitious plans. But again, in reality, it faced a number of challenges. Again, the tightening of its borders along the north and Armenia being forced to adhere to what Azerbaijan wanted and demanded, and a couple of other issues that I had earlier mentioned. Ideologically, what Iran did was use Hezbollah to an extent to offer some help with Russia in at least this is what reports have indicated, in managing the conflict in Ukraine. We all know that it also has been discussing, there are discussions in Iran about the expansion of the Iranian axis of resistance in the South Caucasus and in Eurasia. Iran has ties with the Azerbaijani, so-called Azerbaijani Hezbollah. There are Shia Azerbaijanis that work in Iran, are trained with the Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, according to reports, and some of them have been returned to Azerbaijan, extradited because of Azeri pressures on Iran. But just to highlight the nature of these tensions, when Iran held one drill, it used a brigade in that drill along the borders with Azerbaijan that was called the Azeri Brigade, basically, the Lashkar Ashura, involving Azeri nationals, just again to signal to Azerbaijan that it's not very happy with what's going on. So I'm trying to show the last basically slide that I have here. Iran was economically and ideologically overstretched when it tried to handle the conflicts to its north. It faced immediate threats nonetheless from its north. Its mobility was codependent on Russian strategies in the north, not to say US, Israeli, and Saudi strategies. Iranian rationality occurred only over the need to contain these conflicts. It was basically driven by survival and stability, and that didn't help very much in helping Iran develop a very proactive look east policy when it came to its northern border. So I argue here that in the absence of a strong north policy, Iran's look east policy has also tremendously suffered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keynoush, for that fascinating presentation. I have a question. Are they Azeri citizens or ethnic Azeris, the members of the brigade?
They are citizens of Azerbaijan.
Okay, fascinating. Okay, more later. Okay, so now I'm going to move to our second panelist, Dr. Sinkaya, Dr. Bayram Sinkaya, who is an associate professor of international relations at Ankara Yildirim Beyazıt University. He received his PhD in Middle East Technical University, and he was a visiting researcher at Columbia University and Tehran University. His academic interests includes Iranian politics, foreign and security policies of Iran, Middle East politics, and Turkish foreign policy. And he is the author of The Revolutionary Guards in Iranian Politics, Elites, and Shifting Relations. And Dr. Sinkaya is going to talk to us about Iran-Azerbaijan relations under the shadow of pan-Turkish challenges. So without further ado, please, Professor.
Thank you. Within the framework driven by Dr. Keynoush, I will especially focus on Azerbaijan-Iran relations. Looking at Azerbaijan-Iran relations in the last couple of years, we have seen growing crises. So there are a number of crises emerged in bilateral relations between the two for different reasons. Immediately after the end of the Second Karabakh War, first, Azerbaijan started to impose some road tax to the Iranian drivers bound to Armenia, passing through newly liberated Azerbaijani territories, and provided impediments for Iranian truck drivers bound for Karabakh, so it prevented it. There were consecutive military drills, both Azerbaijan side and in the Iranian side. So these military drills also increased tension between the two states. Additionally, there was verbal brawl between the two states' officials over growing Azerbaijan-Israeli relations. You know, Iran views growing relations between Azerbaijan and Israel as a threat to its own security. And finally, in January of this year, in past January, Azerbaijan suspended its activities of its embassy in Tehran because of the armed attack in the Azerbaijani embassy there, and blamed Iranian authorities for not tracing the case properly. Few months later, again, Azerbaijan declared some Iranian diplomats as persona non grata for interfering in Azerbaijani affairs. In response, Iran also declared 4 Azerbaijani diplomats as persona non grata. So we have seen a growing escalation of tension between the two states. So why it ended with the crisis? What are the main reasons behind the crisis? Looking at the main reasons behind the crisis, I argue that there is mainly 2 reasons. First is changing geopolitical landscape, shifting landscape in the Caucasus against the interest of Iran. The second point is growing specter of pan-Turkism among the Iranian elite. So they are afraid of especially the rise of pan-Turkism, combined with these two together, it led the securitization of Azerbaijan-Iran relations, especially from the perspective of Iran, that ended up with this crisis. So with the shifting geopolitics, we mean, in order to understand the shifting geopolitics of the Caucasus, we need to look at consequences of Second Karabakh War. Before the Second Karabakh War erupted, Iran was mostly relied on the status quo. Iran was happy with the status quo, the stalemate between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it was ignored Caucasus to some extent. So this Iranian indifference to Caucasus, called as later, after the Second Karabakh War, as gaflet strategic by some Iranian scholars, because it proved that while Iran remained indifferent to Caucasus, it lost its capacity and ability to respond unfolding of the crisis during the war, and eventually made Iran as a responsive actor rather than proactive actor in the case. And furthermore, Iran's regional position has been relegated into secondary role because first, Iran's attempt of mediation didn't yield any considerable result. It failed. Although it has good relations with both Armenia and Azerbaijan, it failed to mediate the conflict. Furthermore, Iran was marginalized from the process of brokering ceasefire. It couldn't play an effective role in the ceasefire, so it's left out of the conflict and conflict resolution process to some extent. That means Iran was marginalized and its role had turned to secondary. Additionally, the defeat of Armenia, although Iran supposed to ostensibly have balanced relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia, actually these balanced relations, so-called balanced relations, regarded by some Azerbaijanis as Iranian support for Armenia, because Iranian border, Armenia-Iran border, actually remained as a lifeline for Armenia for over 3 decades, because considering the blockage of Azerbaijan and Turkey over Armenia. So that besides Iran served as a lifeline, it also served as a conduit for Armenian commodities, Armenian military supplies. Furthermore, benefiting from this case, Iran, because Armenia was dependent on Iran to sustain its life, Iran also benefited reaps from this process and increased its relations with Armenia further. And it also increased its relations with autonomous republics, so-called autonomous republic in Northern Karabakh. Although it didn't recognize the independence of the autonomous republic, and it called it as occupation, but they started to make trade and some border relations effective. And furthermore, again, the autonomous republic had considered Iran as the main strategic ally. So, with the defeat of Armenia, Azerbaijan restored its territorial sovereignty over the northern side of border, again against the interest of Iran, because Iran lost its direct access to Karabakh. And it is supposed that Azerbaijani victory will provide further Israeli presence, regarded as a threat by Iran, worked against Iranian interest. And additionally, it is regarded that Baku will be more emboldened against Tehran, because until that time it has preserved a considerable pragmatic policy towards Iran. But from then on, we have seen in the especially speech of Mr. Aliyev some critics against direct critics, harsh critics against Iran. So in this regard, especially the prospective Zangezur corridor envisaged by the ceasefire had an important role because it will end up with Iranian loss of transit feed, but also it will end Iran's leverage over Azerbaijan. Until that time, in order to connect Nakhchivan, Azerbaijan has relied on Iranian territories, but if Azerbaijan have direct access to Nakhchivan, Iran will lose that leverage, so it would work against Iranian interest. And furthermore, the vague term of the ceasefire didn't define how the strategic connections will be established over Zangezur, so whether it will be effectively severing border between Armenia and Iran. If it effectively severe border between Armenia and Iran, so again, Iran, the only northern neighbor of Iran will be Azerbaijan. So Iran's access to Armenia would be cut off. So for this reason, it is regarded as a threat again. And another concern for Iran with the Zangezur corridor was the prospect of this Zangezur turn into Turkish road to Turan, Central Asia, and it is again raised the specter of pan-Turkism among the Iranians. With related to pan-Turkism, it actually set the Iran-Azerbaijan relations from the very beginning, since the establishment of Azerbaijan, beginning with the name of the country of Azerbaijan to the presence of considerable number of Azerbaijani-speaking people in the northwestern part of Azerbaijan. It played an effective role. Especially in the 1990s, during the Elchi Bey's presidency, that specter has risen, but President Aliyev has compromised, had a pragmatic policy towards Azerbaijan. But now, after the Karabakh War, Iran's fears of rise of the specter of pan-Turkism has increased for different reasons. First, there was some growing Azerbaijan Turkish nationalism. It became more public during the Karabakh conflict, so many people staged rallies in support of their so-called northern brethren in the north of Aras. So this, besides the rise of Azerbaijan Turkish nationalism, there was also diplomatic crisis between Turkey and Iran over President Erdogan's reading a poem, grieving over the division of Azerbaijan into two parts on Aras. So we can, my time is consuming, so I cannot spare enough time. So Iran, from the perspective of Iran, it regarded as a threat for territorial integrity of Iran, and aimed at division of Iran or separating the northern part of Iran or Azerbaijani part of Iran. And that contributed to Iran's fear of pan-Turkism is Aliyev's change of the Independence Day. Previously, they were called Independence Day, they were named Independence Day October 18, when they became independent from USSR, but it turned to the establishment of the Azerbaijan Republic, the historical Azerbaijan Republic. It is regarded as a threat, but because especially the Musawatis or pan-Turkist Muhammed Emin Resulzadeh played effective role in the formation of that state, and so it is assessed by some Iranian nationalists as President Aliyev left his legacy of his father and returned to pan-Turkist Muhammed Emin Resulzadeh's way to challenge Iran. And again, President Aliyev made two controversial speeches in the autumn of, in November of last year. So in this speech, one was in the summit meeting of the Organization of Turkic States. He talked about the language rights of Azerbaijani people living outside the country, and it was obvious that he was referring to Azerbaijanis in Iran. And in his second speech, in another conference in Baku, he was more plain that he called Azerbaijanis living in Iran as part of the Azerbaijani people. So they were part of the compatriots of Azerbaijan. So it is regarded as, again, by Iran as public intervention or interference in domestic affairs of Iran and a kind of threat to Iranian security. So Iran tried to respond in different ways. It was responsive. On the one hand, it tried to point out foreign fingers behind the rise of the specter of foreign, this so-called pan-Turkist threat. Especially they not pointed out Azerbaijan and Turkey, but they pointed out Israel and the United States as the main engineers behind the Turan corridor or this so-called pan-Turkist project. Thereby, they tried to marginalize Turkish nationalists, Azerbaijani Turkish nationalists inside Iran. Additionally, Iran made some show of force, deployed military force in the northern border, and declared that it has two red lines. The first red line is the preservation of the international borders inside the South Caucasus and the prevention of Israeli military presence in the region. So it has also engaged in cultivating new ties or strengthening ties with Yerevan. It opened consulate in Kapan, as Dr. Keynoush underlined. Sorry, my time out. Eventually, Iran turned out to be a self-proclaimed protector of territorial integrity of Armenia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sinkaya. Fascinating presentation as well. So we'll discuss it a bit later. We'll have, I think, about 10, 15 minutes for that. Our third speaker is Mr. Hessam Habibi, who is a lecturer and a researcher in Islamic studies and a course coordinator at the University of Applied Sciences in Vienna. He teaches courses on international relations and intercultural and interreligious studies. And he's currently working on his PhD project at the University of Public Service in Budapest. He is the author of Sunni Communities in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And without further ado, he's going to talk to us about Iran-Turkmenistan relations, geostrategic dynamics under the new regional order. Please.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Professor Kamraba and Hamida, for the all assistance and support. It's a great pleasure to be here. So first, when I started to write about this topic, I engaged with this Iran's relation with its neighbor for a long time, and my motivation actually to write about this relation was a statement from President Ebrahim Raisi in 2022 in one of the official visits from Turkmenistan. He said something quite interesting, that relations with Turkmenistan is not just a neighborhood relationship, but it is a family relations. And for me, as a student of international relations, I started to ask, what is a family relation, especially in the context of look east, foreign policy, and all these emphasis on good neighborhood policy. So I tried to answer this family relations at the end of my presentation. A few points about methodology of this paper. I basically looked at all material published in Iran, written by Iranian researchers in different institutions. There are two important books, one published by the Ministry of Defense Academy, and one by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kitab Sabz Turkmenistan. And I tried to include all these materials, which I discussed yesterday with another scholars, that these are very important, in my opinion, to understand how this relation is in Iran perceived and debated. Short note about the historical relations. When I looked at all these sources in Iran, almost all papers, I mean, I'm talking about approximately 25 papers published in Iran in the last 2 decades, only about Iran relation to Turkmenistan. And all papers start with this sentence that Iran was the first country recognized Turkmenistan. And they started with the point that it is an important neighbor for Iran and strategically. Regarding the theoretical part, all these papers that I looked at in Iran are correctly discussing the relations with Turkmenistan from a geopolitical point of view. So I also discuss what is the definition of geopolitics in Iranian academia, quite interesting debate. Since 1992, when the relations started with Turkmenistan, it was everything started in a perfect way. Officials came to Iran, President Hashemi Rafsanjani went to Turkmenistan, and just to highlight how important is this relations, there is a village in Turkmenistan named after President Rafsanjani to just emphasize how this relation, and based on the memoir of President Rafsanjani, he has a good relation with President Safarmurad Niyazov. And this continued also regardless of which political party or political currents in Iran. During President Khatami, it was important to the establishment of Sadd Dusti friendship dam, which was built on the Hari route, very important river, as a very important construction, which is important for the city of Mashhad, as it is one of the main sources of water in this city. And also during presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, there was also the opening of Bajgiran border station, and border market, one of the most important establishment in that time. And by the way, there is also a Maidan Square in Ashgabat named after Ahmadinejad, just to show the respect after his visit to Turkmenistan. So this relation has also certain ups and downs. It was in 2007, 2008, Iranians started to raise question about the neutrality of Turkmenistan, which was welcomed in Iran after the president of Turkmenistan participated in NATO summit in Bucharest. So Iranians started also to raise certain questions in this regard, but nonetheless, the relations remained quite pragmatic. There was no response from Iranian or any escalation in these relations. And I decided to ask myself why both sides try to maintain their strategic ties and commit to maintain these relations. Summarizing all sources in Iran, all this research that I mentioned, there are 4 elements which explain the importance of this relation, and I will add 2 other elements which are not discussed, at least in the Iranian sources, at the end of my presentation. The first element is the geopolitics. In all researchers in Iran, they emphasize the fact that Turkmenistan is actually a gateway for Iran to go to Central Asia. So it is the door to east in a geographical sense. And also, on the other hand, they emphasize on the fact that Turkmenistan is a landlocked country and Iran can offer the fastest and cheapest way to access the open sea, which is also another important point. And in this regard, Baf, Bandar Abbas, Mashhad, Sarakh, Tajan railway is another important example. And also another important point was from the Iranian side that Iran offered Turkmenistan to become independent, because Iranians said, we are independent. Istiqlal, independence, is one of the pillars of Islamic republics. So you want also to be independent from the Russian influence, especially in energy cooperation. Here we are, and this is also an important point which I think from the Turkmenistan side quite respected and interested. The second element is about the water and sea diplomacy. Iran shared 2 important rivers with Turkmenistan. First is Atrak and also Hari route, which is shared between Iran and Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. And as I mentioned, bilaterally Iran opened the dam, a friendship dam with Turkmenistan, and on the other hand, the Indian also created Salma Dam, named an Afghan-Indian friendship dam. So we can see the geopolitical competition in this regard, and especially if we look at Iran's certain issue with Taliban regime regarding Helmand River, it shows the importance of cooperation in the case of water, especially in this environment with Turkmenistan. And also in regard to legal regime of Caspian Sea, which is another issue impacting Iran and Turkmenistan relations bilaterally and multilaterally, it's important to understand that Iran, at least based on the analysis in Iran, it is important to maintain a good relation with Turkmenistan in order to have a better chance to negotiate with other countries around the Caspian Sea. The third and one of the most important elements in this regard is about the border security. I mean, Iran has a long border shared with Turkmenistan. Historically, since the Imperial Russia, Iran in the Treaty of Akhal in 1881, Iran already established certain regulation regarding the borders with Turkmenistan. And in general, the border situation is quite stable with Turkmenistan. It's compared, for instance, with Pakistan or Kurdistan. It showed a certain policy shared from both sides. But nonetheless, the studies in Iran also emphasize on the security aspects of borders. And in general, it's regardless of where, borders are very securitized in Iran. And it's from the discursive point of view, it's always seen as the entrance of the foreigners and enemies to the Iran's country. And in this regard, certain studies in Iran pointed out that it is the influence and the influence of Israelis after establishing the embassy should be observed critically from the Iranian security side. And related to this is the ethno-sectarian aspect, which was also discussed in other discussion by my colleagues in this panel. As we know, we have in Iran Turkmen minorities, Turkmen ethnic groups sharing the same language, culture, and confession. They are also Sunni Hanafis. And in some studies in Iran, especially those from the security sides, they emphasized about this critical sectarian awareness in that region. And it's alarming about that there might be certain sectarian issues around the borders if Iranians are not aware of it. And in the shadow of the regional tensions in the Middle East and competition with Saudi Arabia, even some studies in Iran are starting to say that there is probably a Wahhabi influence there. But honestly, from my side, from my studies, I think it's a little bit exaggerated. As far as I know, the Sunni communities of Turkmen Sunni communities in Iran are quite isolated, with no ties with other Sunni groups, as it was mentioned. And also from the ethnic aspects, there is no civil society or organization in Turkmenistan that can organize, let's say, a movement for the Turkmens. So therefore, in my opinion, it's a possibility, but under the current circumstances, it's not possible, I would say. And also, when I talk with my Turkmen friends, they are also more interested to go to Turkey or to the West too. So they have not a look east perspective, but they don't want to live in Turkmenistan for the future. So it shows that it's not a big concern. And we saw that in one of the latest official visits from Turkmenistan, the president visited Makhtoum Qoli Faraghi mausoleum and with the Turkmen custom, reading Turkmen poetry, which is completely unimaginable in the case of Azerbaijan, for instance. So at the end, in my paper, I argued about a certain change of regional realities, or what we call the systemic shift toward the east. And it seems that the Iranians are quite convinced that it's going to happen, that it's going to benefit the country. I'm not going to discuss this, but as a student, I believe that it's in world politics, we are dealing with unexpected event. So it might go, the look East foreign policy might go in a completely different direction as expected. But my main argument is, if this look East foreign policy gonna work, this will have a good impact on Iran's relations with Turkmenistan. It will help both countries to operationalize certain projects that kind of stopped in the last couple of years. But if it goes also in a different direction and let's say it's not successful, I would argue that this relation between Iran and Turkmenistan will remain the same. Both sides will be committed to maintain their relations because of those 4 elements that I mentioned, and also 2 additional elements that I will bring at the end, which is, first of all, first point is that Turkmenistan is an authoritarian, if not totalitarian state. And in this regard, as discussed also in the keynote speaker, they are also not interested to listen to countries telling them from top, you should do this or so. And the Iranian also not interested to lecture Turkmenistan about human rights. So in that regard, they can cooperate, and it's also preferred from the from Turkmenistan side to cooperate with Iranian. And the second point, which also answered my question to explain Ebrahim Raisi's statement, from the information that I got from people who worked in Turkmenistan or worked with people in Turkmenistan, the relations, business relations basically in Turkmenistan is based on individual level. It's not, I make business with you because I know you personally or I know your family. And that explains the good businesses which is between Iran and Turkmenistan. And it is, of course, a win-win for both sides to escape transparency, for help to corruption. And of course, in the context of economic sanction, this is one of the best way to cooperate, which, of course, helped Iran during the sanction. So therefore, as long as there is no fundamental change, so to say, in Iran or in Turkmenistan, I would argue that this relation will continue as the same. But in case there is fundamental change domestically in Iran or in Turkmenistan, then we might have certain dramatic changes in both sides. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fascinating presentation, and thank you also for keeping the time. That's excellent. So now we have some time for about 12 minutes, perhaps, for Q&A and comments and feedback. So I'll open the floor for the audience, please. Yes, please.
Thank you. I think it was a very interesting panel. Regarding Zangezur, I think Professor knows that in even this peace treaty or ceasefire treaty, there is nothing that shows takeover of this land by Azerbaijan. So still it is Armenian land, and change of borders is nothing that can be accepted by any state, including Turkey. I think Turkey, if you lose one of your borders neighbors, I think it would not be easy. So my question in this regard is, the vagueness that you mentioned, isn't it a narrative, a Turkish narrative for more presence in Caucasus, and it is not in the text? So it is an interpretation of what is the intent of the Turkish-Azerbaijan relationship. And I think Iran has the legitimate right to defend the territorial integrity of itself. And I have to tell you, regardless of some Turkish, what you said, pan-Turkism, I think Iranians at large are very nationalistic in defense of their land, and here you cannot divide. One final point, I think I want your response on this. The Republic of Azerbaijan has a type of psychological, historical issue. It is a new nation in one way, and it was part of Iran. So reference to, I mean, we lost it in 1828 to Russians. So any reference to the Azerbaijan is outside by Aliyev is reflective of a Stalinist, let's say, pan-Azeri, which is used as a strategic tools by great powers. And I think the record here is a response. So to what extent it is out of a psychological, let's say, reading of what Azerbaijan identity is? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll have some intense discussion of these issues. Please, Abdul Rasul.
Thank you so much for the very interesting panel. Just very short comment and one question. About Israel, the panelists talked about the role of Israel in the Caucasus region, but I think just emphasizing on the importance of how Iranians from a security perspective are looking at that. I think Iranians are perceiving Israeli-Azerbaijani connection as a possible copy of Iranian presence, copy of Iranian model of intervention in Lebanon and in Syria by Israelis. What I mean is that for the security apparatus in Iran, that's very critical to prevent the formation of any sort of Israeli-Azerbaijani strategic thing that can end up to the encirclement of Iran. So this is a very big issue when it comes to the Caucasus. And then the question is about, well, Dr. Sajjadpour asked somehow, but just to put it in another way, that what is in the Turkish calculus or assessment, possible Iranian response? Because I think Turks also know very well that the Iranians are quite decisive about Zangezur and any political things. I mean, moving of Iranian army to the north was not just for a show of power. It was really going to get there. So what is the Turkish assessment of possible Iranian response? I mean, how Turks are assessing that and probably trying to manage the situation?
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. It seems after Ukraine war, Russian position become close to Azerbaijan and Turkey position about Zangezur corridor. Considering this issue, do you think the Zangezur dispute will solve in a way that not disconnect Iran's lands and air ways to Armenia?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we have two more, and then I'll revert back to the panelists, please.
Thank you. This is Deepika Saraswat. My question is to Hessam Habibi. Is about Israel and Turkmenistan having, the embassies in each of their countries. Why now? I mean, what's Turkmenistan's logic?
Thank you. And here, please. It's here.
شكرا جزيلا سيد رئيس الجلسة وأحييكم. أنا سأتكلم بالعربي.
I'm going to speak in Arabic. I am a history philosophy professor from Aden University, and I'm specialized in the civilizational conflict today. When I came to this conference, I came to know to what extent this transformation in Iran is taking place. We know that the pan-Turkish countries, as it was expressed, and also the regional powers, also to what extent do you think the Arabs would have a role in this very critical period of time? Particularly, we're talking about the rise in Chinese civilization, the Russian civilization, the American civilization, and the European civilization. To what extent do you think that the Arabs with Turkey and Iran can play a real role in this very, very critical moment? Thank you very much.
So now, back to the panelists. I think, Dr. Sinkaya, most of the questions were headed towards you, so please.
Thank you. Professor Sajjadpour, with your question, yes, you are right. I try to underline that point. It is not clear in the ceasefire document how to achieve the transport connections. It is not called as corridor, but it is interpreted as corridor by Azerbaijan and Turks in general. Later, some Iranian nationalists also copied it as Turan corridor, not Zangezur corridor. So there's a kind of exaggeration on both sides, on Turkish nationalists, Azerbaijan nationalists, and Iranian nationalists, on the prospective Zangezur so-called corridor, because ceasefire document states that unimpediment movement of goods and persons and commodities between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. So how can we achieve this? It is a technical question. They may find a technical solution without threatening the sovereignty of Armenia over that territory. It is not clear for the time, and for that purpose, Armenia and Azerbaijan need to negotiate among themselves, because it is is a matter of Armenian sovereignty as well. Anyhow, what frightened the Iranians is the Azerbaijan threat of use to realize that corridor. At several occasions, President Aliyev, because of failure of negotiations with Armenia, he stated that Azerbaijan is ready to implement that corridor, if necessary, by force. So if Azerbaijan made such an attempt, it will be a severe threat, both for Armenia and, again, Iran. So that is the major point of disagreement. But 3 years after the ceasefire, nothing has realized for the implementation of that corridor. Still, they are waiting for negotiations. Again, historically, Azerbaijan regarded as part of Iran to some extent, but since the establishment of the Azerbaijan Republic, there is always a clash of nationalisms between Iranian identity, Iranian nationalism, and Azerbaijani Turkish nationalism. Even it played an effective role in the formation of Iranian nationalism during the 1950s, 30s. But the legacy of the foundation of the Republic of Azerbaijan in the north of Aras is that it is still threatening Iran's territorial integrity to some extent from the viewpoint of the Iranian nationalism. So, of course, I mean, in the current process, it seems also a bit exaggerated anyhow, but nationalists are manipulating these fears of pan-Turkism, fears of territorial losses. And finally, with related to role of Arab countries, Iran and Turkey, there are some attempts of cooperation between these three nations, three civilizations. I think it will be more fruitful and it will serve to the interest of regional countries rather than competing and fighting against each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Keynoush, do you have any comments?
I mean, only to add to what has been said, I just want to say that currently the trade volume between Azerbaijan and Iran is pretty strong because it just is. They are neighbors, and I think you also mentioned that they do like to trade, and Iran is using trade as an incentive to keep these borders flowing. However, I think we are overlooking a fundamental geopolitical calculation which is far bigger than Iran itself, and that is the West and the influence of the West, and by extension, the influence of Israel, and let's not undermine the influence of Saudi Arabia in Central Asia and the Caucasus through investments, massive investments that have to date competed against Iranian interests in Central Asia when it comes to the development of energy resources, etc. But in this midst, Iran is a small player. Iranians think that they are the center of the world, but they are a very, very small player in this midst, in the sense that Russia and the United States are the bigger actors here. And we are aware, despite this exaggerations that have happened about the Zangezur, that Russia has actually at times sided with Azerbaijan, although officially it doesn't take a side in the Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict. Russians have stationed basically border troops or near the areas in Iran's northern corridors. They have prevented Iranians from crossing. They've even openly said that they are concerned about the spread of terrorists coming through Iran into Central Asia, illicit drug trafficking. So the question is, why are the Russians doing this? And I believe very humbly that Russia has Ukraine in mind and the negotiations that it must have inevitably with the West over Ukraine. And Iran is a small sacrifice in this process. And in the absence of a strong look north policy, Dr. Sajjadpour, I don't think Iran will be able to navigate this landscape very easily. Just as it was unable to navigate the post-JCPOA landscape very easily, because it fell in the trap of thinking that it was the center of American attention when it did conclude the JCPOA. That is not the case. American attention span on foreign policy issues is far more fast-moving than what Iranians, calculate. So I would say that Iran is in great danger, actually, despite the exaggeration. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So the final words are for Dr. Habib.
Thank you.
And be mindful that you're between now and lunch, so, Yeah.
And I have a question about Israel. And so just I fully agree with Dr. Difsalar about the point with Israel. Just to mention the relations between Turkmenistan and Israel existed before the establishment of embassy. There are Jewish people living in Turkmenistan. And, President Niyazov's wife is also Jewish from Russia, and there were many travels to Israel. So I think the biggest concern is, from the practical perspective, is the issue of the rise of extremism after Taliban's takeover, which is now a common concern for Iran and Turkmenistan. And the issue with Israel is remain and more in a discursive level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sinkaya has a very quick note.
I
30
want to
seconds.
forget to respond Dr. Difsalar's intervention on resemblance between Iran-Lebanese relations and Israel-Azerbaijan relations. I don't agree with this similarity because Lebanon is a failed state and Iran is free to build a state in a state in that country. But in Azerbaijan, Israel is cooperating with the legal actor, and Azerbaijan is no more, in no sense, could be regarded as a failed state. Thank you.
Okay, I will have to close on that note, although probably there is more discussion to be upcoming. Thank you very much to our esteemed speakers. And thank you for the audience and for our online followers as well. And now we'll leave you guys for lunch. Please be back here at 2 p.m., 1400. Thank you.